Hello, I'm Jason Diaz, the neurodivergent existential psychologist, and today let's talk about inner peace. This is a bit of writing I did about I don't know 8 or 9 years ago on the topic I just mentioned. I wrote this when I was still practicing therapy every day or almost every day. All right, here we go. Often clients come to therapy looking for relief from symptoms, armed with talking points from pharmaceutical advertisements, such as depression is a serious medical condition. I'm taking antidepressants, but I still feel sad. And most notoriously, depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, and I need to correct it. Sometimes, though, they arrive with a different set of language. Sometimes they complain of always being in turmoil, stuck, feeling ashamed, worrying too much, and their goal is just to feel a sense of peace in their self. The quest for a sense of peace can be seen as akin to the desire to reduce symptoms, not to feel actively good, perhaps, but just to not feel bad. But it can also be seen as a quest to feel relief, as something more than the absence of pain, as musician John Cage challenged us to hear silence as more than the absence of sound. When we have uncomfortable feelings, we want them to go away and leave us in peace. We perhaps even become uncomfortable about our discomfort. I shouldn't feel sad, or I shouldn't feel angry, and therefore I'm sad or angry about being sad or angry. Anxiety, rather than being a normal part of life, becomes a force for interference and dysfunction. I think the problem is primarily one of identification. That is, we tend to think of ourselves as the part of our mind that thinks in words. This wordy thinker is the miniature us sitting at the controls in our head. Um, and the rest of thought, imagery, proprioception, emotions, that's just stuff that happens to us. The truth might be far different. The truth might be um, very unlike the cartoon Inside Out that folks related to so strongly. Not very long after conception, we come into some awareness of our body, its position, its state, the stimuli that surround us in the womb. Proprioception, that is your body's awareness of its own position in space, and then feelings, uh, pre emotional conditions dominate our existence. Later, we experience attachment, and through attachment, we learn emotions and their expression and their meanings. Much later, we learn to talk. And this thin veneer of wordy expression tops off a very deep and layered consciousness that has almost nothing to do with words. When you feel something, you are that feeling. Just as much as when you think something, you are that thought. Your emotions are a part of you, an expression of the process that is you in the world in a deeper way than your thoughts are. Thus, when you feel sad, you are sad. Sadness is not some alien construct beamed into your experience from nowhere. It's part of you, made in that moment for some purpose. Perhaps in the moment it is wise to be sad. Or in a different paradigm, maybe it's functional to be sad or spiritual to be sad. When we try to excise our feelings, what we're really doing is trying to excise a part of ourselves. Taking medication to reduce sadness or anxiety means aggressing against the part that is sad or anxious. This kind of self aggression is currently rampant in the Western world as the medical field transforms from a helping industry to a for profit industry. We turn away from any part of us that does not feel good or does not look good, which is far from saying that nobody needs psychiatric medication, and if you're taking antidepressants and they help, just turn this off. Um, yeah, yeah. I'm still going to invite you to try and have some more empathy for yourself. Most of us have more empathy than this for other people. If we saw a sad friend, we would offer them comfort. We might ask what was wrong or offer a shoulder to cry on, or even just a smile and a kind word. It seems unreasonable to cut your friend out of your life because they are sad. But we're perfectly willing to do this to ourselves, to cut the sad self out. No sympathy, no comfort, no kind words, only warfare in the form of cognitive therapies and medication designed to annihilate the feelings. The question is, how can one expect to find any kind of inner peace when committing these acts of self aggression on a daily basis? For me, therapy often comes to this point. I invite my clients to sit with their feelings of anger or sadness or anxiety or distress. Sometimes they need some coping skills to be able to tolerate the feelings long enough to dwell in them. Sometimes we can get there a little faster, but the object is just to be all right with feeling bad sometimes. It's like taking control of your diet. First, you have to realize that being hungry is not an emergency. You don't have to take extreme measures at the first twinge of hunger. It's all right to wait a while and then to eat in a measured fashion. Ditto emotions. They're not an emergency that needs to be fixed immediately, but rather a natural part of life that can be tended to in an orderly fashion. Once a person can sit with their feelings without panicking, they can start to probe a little deeper. Eugene Gendlin's focusing techniques can work wonders, for example. One might also set up an empty chair and invite the person to ask their sadness what it needs from them. After all, the sadness is part of you, and so you know what it needs and what it wants and what it's trying to communicate. When feelings and emotions are allowed to be part of normal life, and better still, allowed to communicate their needs, then the person can start to experience emotions in a way that's not turbulent or conflicted. It becomes possible to experience peacefulness. Nobody ever found peace through self aggression. That self acceptance is a radical sort of notion when you dig into it very deeply. Far from being a staunch and strident anti medication position, is more of an invitation to dwell in what we feel without it being an emergency right now. For some people, that just isn't effective. But we've reached a point in the United States where most mental illnesses are not diagnosed by mental health care professionals. They're diagnosed in emergency rooms and urgent cares, as you know, as an aside, as an extra. You show up with a wounded hand, and they give you a depression inventory, and then the urgent care doctor just diagnoses depression based on a single instrument and hands out psychiatric medication. And so we've reached this point where um, um, what we used to just call depression is now very serious depression. And there are so many of us who are the worried well or the walking wounded, um, who even 15 years ago would never have qualified for a real depression diagnosis. And for us, I think it makes a certain amount of sense to, if you think you really have a serious mental illness, then visit an actual mental health practitioner. Um, Go to the emergency room if that's what you have, or the urgent care if that's what you have. But then ask to be seen by someone who really is qualified and will do diligence to psychiatric diagnoses. And for the rest of us in this middle ground between feeling good and feeling bad and in the distance being sick, in this sort of middle ground, we could certainly make friends more with our feelings. All right, thanks for listening.